Beijing's nuclear stockpile outpacing Pentagon projections. A new report shedding light on China's latest warhead advances. Washington's top diplomat to China saying the two countries don't align on the Middle East war and urging Beijing to take a hard line on Hamas. Bad to the bone. 4 are charged with stealing $1 million worth of dinosaur bones in Utah and selling them to China. And chilling video shows a knife-wielding driver shot by police.
Mr. Yang made multiple rapid downward swinging motions with the knife.
This after he crashed into the Chinese consulate in San Francisco while shouting about the Chinese Communist Party. What prompted the incident? What do you think? Let us know below and subscribe if you haven't already. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Beijing's nuclear stockpile growing faster than the West expected. A new report from the Pentagon estimates China has over 500 nuclear warheads as of May. The DoD estimates that China would have over 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. In comparison, the U.S. has over 3,700 active nuclear warheads, and Russia has over 1,600. China has largely refused to join arms talks with the U.S. since last year, after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Russia also suspended a treaty with the U.S. on limiting nuclear forces. China also hiked up military spending for 2023 by over 7%, now reaching over $200 billion. That number comes from the Pentagon's annual report to Congress about China's military power. The U.S. has its hands full right now, rushing weapons to battlefields in both Ukraine and Israel. Despite that, America's national defense strategy is shaped around China, and a threat from Beijing would influence the future of U.S. military development. Back to the new report, it also found more Chinese jets are coming dangerously close to American planes in international airspace. Declassified footage shows one incident where a Chinese jet flew just 10 feet below a U.S. plane. The U.S. has seen more than 180 such incidents, more in the last 2 years than in the decade before that.
The PRC can and must end this behavior. Full stop.
The report also mentioned China is almost certainly learning from Russia's war on Ukraine, with an eye on Taiwan. China has been upping its pressure on the island, deploying record numbers of jets to fly near it. The Chinese regime views the island as its own territory, despite never having ruled it. Beijing also expanded its navy from 340 ships more than 370. Despite those developments, Beijing's military still faces a major challenge. China hasn't fought a war since 1979, so its troops lack combat experience. Washington's ambassador to China is speaking up about the Israel-Hamas war. He says Beijing and the U.S. have different perspectives on the conflict. Ambassador Nicholas Burns spoke to Bloomberg TV Thursday. He pointed out that while the U.S. and China have both voiced support for a two-state solution to the conflict, the two do not have identical views on this particular position. He also called on the Chinese Communist Party to denounce the attacks by the Hamas terrorist group. As of now, Beijing appears to have sided with Palestinians. Its foreign minister criticized Israel's self-defense response earlier this week, though leader Xi Jinping has called for a ceasefire. On the other hand, the U.S. strengthened support for Israel with a historic in-person visit by President Biden and by sending military vessels into the region. That's to deter surrounding countries from joining the fight. But while Washington's stance differs from China's, Russia's does not. The longtime friend to Beijing has sympathized with Palestine and heaped blame for the conflict onto the U.S. President Putin traveled to China this week for an infrastructure forum and a meeting with Xi Jinping about the war. Critics say the two aim to weaken U.S. influence around the globe and present an alternative to the Western-led world order. Amid the ongoing U.S.-China tech war, Beijing is unveiling new restrictions on another critical mineral, graphite, and it's crucial for electric car makers. Let's dive in.
New restrictions announced in China could be unwelcome news for the growing electric vehicle market. Beijing said on Friday it will require export permits for some graphite products to protect national security. It's the latest move by the country to control supplies of critical minerals in response to challenges over its global manufacturing dominance. The reason this might hurt EV makers is because China refines more than 90% of the world's graphite into the material used in virtually all EV battery anodes. That's the negatively charged portion of a battery. One analyst said South Korean firms heavily rely on the graphite imports from China, but would have to look elsewhere to the US or Australia, and that would likely raise the cost burden for many. Automakers are now racing to lock in supplies from outside China, but there could be shortages. China will now require, as of December, that exporters apply for permits to ship 2 types of graphite. Beijing said the move was conducive to ensuring the security and stability of the global supply chain and safeguarding national security. China's decision comes while the EU considers tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, which it argues unfairly benefit from subsidies. The US government also widened curbs on Chinese companies' access to semiconductors earlier this week. Analysts said it was not clear how much impact the new measures on graphite will have in the short term. But on Friday, shares in China's new energy vehicle and battery makers rose after the announcement.
Under the shadow of war in Israel, the Taliban is seeking to get closer to America's biggest rival.
We requested China to allow us to be a part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and Belt and Road Initiative, and the past that join us through Tajikistan.
That's after the Taliban's acting commerce minister returned from Beijing this week, where he attended a summit for China's Belt and Road Infrastructure project. No government has recognized the Taliban's regime since it forcibly toppled Afghanistan's government 2 years ago. At the same time, Beijing appointed an ambassador to Afghanistan last month and seeks to expand business cooperation with the Taliban. And a major way to do that is through the just concluded forum. Beijing confirmed a round of new projects during the Belt and Road Summit, totaling over $97 billion. What's Beijing's goal for offering up billions of dollars in loans to developing countries?
Today, the entire GDP of Afghanistan is made up by 2 things: drug money and foreign aid. Everybody, no one in Afghanistan, except maybe the Taliban, and are better off than they were before. And of course, the third thing we worry about is the expanding influence of China.
Just after the summit, Chinese leader Xi Jinping held another round of talks with 3 developing countries' leaders Friday: Sri Lanka, Brazil, and Vietnam. Sri Lanka sits on a critical location for maritime trade. After it inked its Belt and Road deal, it proved unable to repay its Chinese debt. In exchange, it had to hand over control of a deep water port to Beijing on a 99-year lease. That incident and others like it sparked critics to dub the Belt and Road a debt trap. Now, other nations are looking to offer developing countries an alternative. Around 20 leaders from the European Union are set to host a similar infrastructure forum next week. Now turning to the Korean peninsula, Russia's foreign minister met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Thursday, the 2 countries pledging closer defense ties.
North Korea is a close neighbor and longtime partner of our country.
Lavrov thanked North Korea for supporting Russia's war on Ukraine. He also said Moscow has pledged complete support for Kim Jong-un. The U.S. said North Korea had started sending weapons in bulk to Russia. Lavrov's trip sets the stage for Putin's potential visit to North Korea. The 2 leaders met in September, where they discussed potential military cooperation. An update on the San Francisco Chinese Consulate car crash incident. A man rammed his car into the consulate lobby last week. Now, newly released body camera footage shows a tense encounter with the police before the altercation that ended in a fatal shooting. Let's take a closer look.
San Francisco police on Thursday released body camera video of the fatal shooting by an officer at the city's Chinese consulate on October the 9th, after a man rammed his car into the consulate's visa office and scuffled with police. At an online briefing, San Francisco Police Acting Commander Mark Im identified the man as Zhan Yuanyang, a 31-year-old Chinese citizen.
The sergeant approached Mr. Yang and ordered him to get on the ground, but he did not comply.
What, you got a gun?
As the sergeant and the security guard pinned Mr. Yang from behind against the wall, Mr. Yang rotated towards the sergeant and the security guard and exposed a knife in his right hand. The sergeant blocked Mr. Yang's right elbow as Mr. Yang continued to turn towards them. Mr. Yang made multiple rapid downward swinging motions with the knife towards the direction of the sergeant and the security guard.
Im said the sergeant then stepped back and fired his gun at Yang, who fell on the floor. He was later pronounced dead at a hospital. Apart from the knife Yang wielded, police said a loaded crossbow with arrows were found in his car. Though no gun was found at the scene, according to recordings of 911 calls on the day, witnesses had reported seeing the driver with a gun, raising the stakes of the situation. Police said they were unable to answer questions about Yang's immigration status or possible motives. At a news briefing on the day of the incident, police had said few details could be given because it happened inside a consulate, so the investigation involved multiple government and diplomatic parties. At the time, China's foreign mission called it a violent attack on the consulate. On Thursday, San Francisco Police Chief William Scott did not comment on the officer's shooting, but spoke of general police training.
If an officer believes that this event has the makings of an active attacker, what we train them to do is stop the threat immediately.
Police said the department was continuing an internal review of police conduct, along with a separate investigation into the overall case itself.
Investigators did not identify a motive for the suspect, though a witness earlier told reporters he was yelling about the Chinese Communist Party as he exited the car while bleeding from a wound on his head. The consulate has been targeted before. A protest against Beijing's zero COVID-19 policies saw the building vandalized with graffiti in November. It was also damaged by multiple arson attacks in the past. U.S. investment firm Sequoia Capital is facing scrutiny from lawmakers over its cash flow into China. The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party is investigating the company over its funding the regime's high-tech sectors. More specifically, the Congress members are looking into areas like AI, microchips, and quantum computing. The Silicon Valley giant began breaking up with its China arm back in June, ahead of an executive order aimed at preventing U.S. capital from flowing into Beijing-controlled firms. Lawmakers are also demanding a list of all China-based or affiliated companies Sequoia has funded. Some of them now work under the Chinese military. That includes Paradigm. The Beijing-based tech firm builds AI for military battlefield training programs. Sequoia also invested in DJI, a Chinese drone manufacturer that reportedly helped facilitate the regime's surveillance in the Xinjiang region. Bad to the bone. 4 people are accused of selling dinosaur bones from public land in Utah to China. A federal grand jury in Salt Lake City indicted the group for stealing $1 million worth of artifacts. The haul amounts to 150,000 pounds of items, including dinosaur bones that were illegally removed from southeastern Utah. The defendants also allegedly caused more than $3 million in damages. Prosecutors allege that the defendants committed several felonies. By law, any fossils or organism traces preserved in or on the Earth's crust are protected items. Beginning in March 2018, the defendants purportedly purchased, transported, and exported dinosaur bones from federal land. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. A global diplomatic reshuffling. China's third Belt and Road Forum wraps up with Russia's president and the Taliban as key guests. How do strategic moves from China and Russia impact global relations? And what's India's stance? To discuss, we sat down with national security analyst Antonio Graceffo. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epic TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you soon.